Jake Morrison stepped off the transport shuttle with flowers in hand and a nervous smile on his face, because today marked 6 months since he met Maya Rodriguez, the brilliant tactical officer who somehow saw past his awkward jokes and clumsy charm to find something worth loving. And he wanted this anniversary to be perfect. But the moment he approached her family quarters on the massive orbital station hovering above the alien homeworld of Valeria, he knew something had gone terribly wrong. The door slid open before he could press the chime, and instead of Maya, her mother stood there with an expression that made his stomach drop because Ambassador Kira was not human, despite raising Maya after her human father married into the Valerian royal house 2 decades ago. And right now those luminescent purple eyes held something between pity and steel. "We need to talk," she said without preamble, and gestured him inside with one elegant 6-fingered hand. Jake followed her into the ornate receiving room where crystalline sculptures caught the light from 3 suns visible through the viewport, and he clutched the flowers tighter because whatever was coming, he already knew he would not like it. "Maya has been chosen," Kira began, and her voice carried harmonics that human vocal cords could never produce, which was why she rarely spoke in public, preferring to let translators handle diplomatic communications. But here in private, she spoke directly, and Jake heard every layered meaning beneath her words, chosen for what he managed to ask, though his throat felt tight. The Calatharn bonding, Kira explained and gestured to a holographic display that materialized between them, showing symbols and diagrams Jake could not begin to understand because he was just a junior officer who flew patrol routes and filed reports, not someone who studied ancient alien customs. Every century our people select the most promising young women for a sacred ritual that binds them to warriors of the highest caliber, Kira continued, and her expression softened slightly as she looked at Jake, who stood frozen in place because he was beginning to understand what she meant. "Maya did not choose this," he said, and it was not quite a question. "Oh, one chooses," Kira replied, "but her genetics marked her as compatible, and the council made their decision 3 days ago, which is why I am telling you now before the trials begin. Tomorrow. Trials." Jake repeated and set the flowers down on a nearby table because his hands were shaking and he needed to focus. "If you wish to claim Maya as your mate, you must complete 3 trials that will prove you worthy of a Valerian bond," Kira explained, and brought up new images showing arenas and challenge, courses that looked designed to kill rather than test. "And if I refuse," Jake asked, though he already knew he would never walk away from Maya, no matter what they demanded of him. "Then Prince Xanthar will complete the bonding unopposed, and Maya will become his consort, bound by genetics and tradition to a male she has never met," Kira said flatly because she was nothing, if not direct. Jake felt anger flare hot in his chest because humans had outlawed arranged marriages centuries ago, and the idea that anyone would force Maya into this made him want to punch something, preferably the smug face of whatever alien prince thought he could claim her like property. "What are the trials?" he asked, and straightened his shoulders because whatever came next he would face it. "The first is combat," Kira said, and the hologram shifted to show a massive arena with weapons lining the walls, because Valerians respected strength above all else, and any male who could not defend his mate had no right to claim one. "The second is intellect, because a bond requires more than muscles, and you must solve the labyrinth of mirrors, which has defeated countless champions throughout our history. "The third is sacrifice," Kira finished, and her voice dropped lower, carrying weight that made Jake shiver because he understood instinctively that this final trial would cost him something precious. "What kind of sacrifice?" he asked. "That you will learn only if you survive the first 2 trials." Kira replied and dismissed the hologram with a wave of her hand because apparently she had said all she intended to say. Jake took a breath and met her eyes because he needed her to understand what Maya meant to him, even if words felt inadequate. "I love your daughter," he said simply, and honestly, because there was no point in pretending or playing diplomatic games when everything that mattered hung in the balance. Kira studied him for a long moment, and something shifted in her expression, though Jake could not read alien features well enough to know if it was approval or merely acknowledgement. "Then you will report to the arena at dawn," she said, and turned away because the conversation was over, and Jake had preparations to make. He left the quarters and walked through the station corridors in a daze because 6 hours ago his biggest concern had been whether Maya would like the flowers, And now he faced 3 trials that might kill him, and even if he survived, there was still this sacrifice waiting at the end, like a blade, hanging over his neck. Jake found Maya in the observation deck where she stood silhouetted against the stars, and when she turned at the sound of his footsteps, he saw tears tracking down her face. "You talked to my mother," she said, "and it was not a question, yeah?" Jake replied and crossed the distance between them to pull her into his arms because whatever else happened, they still had this moment. "I did not want this." Maya whispered against his chest, and her hands clutched his uniform jacket, like she was afraid he might disappear. "I know," Jake said, and pressed a kiss to the top of her head, because words felt useless but touch still carried meaning. "You could leave." She continued and pulled back enough to look up at him with those dark eyes he loved so much because they held galaxies of intelligence and compassion that made him want to be better than he was. "You could take the next transport back to Earth, and no one would blame you, because these trials were not meant for humans. And Xanthar is the greatest warrior of his generation." Jake cupped her face in both hands and smiled despite everything, because the answer was obvious, even if the path ahead terrified him. "I am not leaving," he said firmly, and watched relief flood her expression. "But you could die," she protested weakly because she had to say it even though they both knew he had already made his choice. "Then I die trying to keep you," Jake replied and kissed her properly because dawn would come too soon, and he wanted to remember this feeling when he faced whatever waited in that arena. The first trial began with horns that echoed across the station, and Jake stepped into the arena wearing light armor that felt like paper compared to what his opponent wore because Xanthar stood waiting across the sand in full ceremonial war plate that gleamed like liquid mercury under the artificial lights. The prince was massive, easily 7 feet tall with 4 arms and skin that shifted colors like oil on water. And when he smiled, it revealed 3 rows of crystalline teeth that could probably tear through steel. "The human thinks to challenge me," Xanthar said in perfect English, because of course he had studied his opponent. "Jake thinks to keep what is his," Jake replied and selected a staff from the weapon rack because trying to match strength against someone twice his size would be suicide. They fought, and it was brutal because Xanthar moved like water and struck like lightning, and Jake found himself bleeding from a dozen cuts before he understood the pattern. Because Valerians fought with rhythm, and once you heard the music you could dance between the beats. Jake stopped trying to overpower and started flowing instead, because humans were adaptable if nothing else, and he used his smaller size to slip past guards and strike joints and pressure points that made even a prince stumble. The crowd roared, and Jake did not hear them, because everything narrowed to the fight, until finally, his staff cracked across Xanthar's knee with enough force to buckle the joint, and the prince went down hard yield. Jake demanded with his weapon poised for a killing strike. He really hoped he would not have to deliver. Xanthar looked up at him with something like respect flickering across his alien features and dipped his head in acknowledgement. "The human has won the first trial," he announced to the crowd. Jake helped him stand because holding grudges seemed stupid when they had both been forced into this situation. And Xanthar actually laughed as he limped from the arena. The second trial took place in a chamber filled with mirrors that reflected not just light, but possibilities because the labyrinth of mirrors showed you every choice you could make, and most challengers went mad, trying to chase perfect futures that did not exist. Jake walked through reflections of himself winning and losing, loving and dying, succeeding and failing, until he understood that the labyrinth had no solution because life itself had no single correct path. So he stopped looking for the exit and started looking for Maya, because she was his constant in every reflection. And when he followed her image through the twisting corridors, he found the center where she waited real and solid and smiling. "You solved it," she said with wonder in her voice. "I just followed you," Jake replied, because it was true. And sometimes the simplest answer was correct. The third trial awaited, and Kira stood before them, both with an expression of sorrow. "The sacrifice," she said, "is memory. You must choose which memories to keep of each other because the bonding ritual will burn away everything else to make room for the genetic connection. And you will forget how you met and fell in love and all the small moments that brought you here." Jake felt the words like a physical blow because those memories were everything that made them real. Unless, Kira continued, "There is another way." What way? Maya,